Tom Clancy, one of the best-selling authors of our time, he has virtually created the genre of the techno-thriller. His books have crossed over into film, television, even video games. And the success of films like The Hunt for Red October and Clear and Present Danger have made movie producers awaiting his next book as eagerly as readers. But he remains devoted to the craft of writing. He has spent the last 2 years working on his latest book. It is called Rainbow Six. It picks up with the character of John Clark. I am pleased to have Tom Clancy back at this table. Welcome back.
Well, nice to be back, Charlie.
It's good to have you. You've been working on it for how long?
Well, I wrote the book in about 4.5 months, I guess, as usual. Started working on it at the end of December of last year, and finished it in early May.
Why back to John Clark?
I just felt like the thing to do. It was the book I wanted to write this year.
Yeah. Why was that?
It just felt like it. Why did I pick a 5-iron instead of a 6-iron? It's just the right iron.
What felt right about it, though? What felt right to talk about, to write a story about?
It just seemed like a fun subject. John's running a group called Rainbow. It's a NATO multinational counterterror team, and that's sort of a job for John.
John is 60?
He's in his middle 50s now, I guess.
Yeah. How is he different from Jack Ryan?
Well, John has always been Ryan's dark side. He's the guy who does things that Ryan would prefer not to do.
Ryan is more academic, he's more action.
He's the guy who goes out in the field and gets his hands dirty. Yeah.
What else?
He kills people.
What else?
And he's smart.
You don't set out with the end in mind. I mean, you, in a sense, let the story take over. There's no perfect outline in which you finish chapter by chapter.
I never do outlines.
No, it's not like a storyboard that you already have in your mind, wrapped several times around your office.
Nope.
So how does that happen then? I mean, you just give them wheels and they go running?
You tell the story, and the story has a natural beginning, middle, and end.
But today, when you're writing this, today you get up one morning and you don't know, or you have some idea of where the character is going to do that day? Or
you have a rough idea, but not always a precise one.
So what tells you about the twists and turns of action?
The characters.
The more you involve yourself within their...
You let your characters do your thinking for you.
The idea of setting up the plot for these, because of the way you tie so many, you lay something going here and something out here and something out here, and it's all going to connect, and where does that come from?
I really don't know, but as long as it stays, I'm not going to worry about it. It's what I do. It's my job, and sometimes doing a job is a lot easier than explaining it.
Are you better? Do you feel more comfortable doing it today? Does each novel get easier, more interesting?
No, they don't. And the reason is your expectations seem to always race ahead of your abilities. I mean, the more you do something, the better you get at it. I'm sure I'm a better writer today than I was 10 years ago. Yeah. But your expectations keep going a little bit faster. You're always in competition with yourself.
What do you know, because of your interest in most things military, about this idea of the Russians not knowing where all the bombs are?
First of all, I don't think it's true. I mean,
you think they know where they all are?
They must know. Right. I mean, you don't mislay a nuclear device. That's number one.
Well, it's a lot of.
And number two, back in the 1970s, we have this thing on all our nuclear devices called PALs, permissible action links. It's a safety system that goes on the weapon. And back in the 1970s, the United States government did something very intelligent. We gave our PAL technology to the Russians, so that their nukes would be as safe as our nukes. Yeah. And I'm reliably informed that cracking through a PAL is not a trivial exercise. And as a guy once told me, he said, you got to be really smart and really lucky not to get killed.
So if some general who's pissed off because of the way things are, if some general says, I'm not happy about the way this government is treating me, and other officers just no way.
Weapon, and he can't take the weapon apart. Neither. So
only Yeltsin has the sort of black box.
Or the people close around him, who have the activation codes,
What interests you about the military landscape today?
Today? Yeah. Well, same thing. They've still got the nicest toys. And they're still instruments of national policy. When the president picks up the phone and says, we have to do something today, they're the people who have to go do it.
And how good is our Army today, and our Air Force, and our Navy, and our Marines, and our SEALs? You're talking about Clark being an ex-SEAL.
They're the best in the world.
Are they really?
By
the
far.
best fighting because of their weapons or because of their training or
Both.
because of their something else?
Weapons and training.
Really?
Now, I mean, we're not spending as much money on training today as we used to, and that's a little worrisome, but they're still the best in the world.
And do we have the best strategists, the best generals, the best?
The people we have are awfully good, but that's a case where the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and you don't really know for sure until you're in a shooting war.
And what did we find out in the Gulf? In Desert
1991, we found out they were pretty good, but those guys are just about all retired now. Now the senior commanders, Freddie Franks is gone, Schwarzkopf is retired, Colin Powell's retired, but the guys.
Waller's retired.
But the people they trained are now in those jobs, and you have a continuity of skill and education. These are good people. Are they absolutely the best in the world? You don't know for sure, but they're probably plenty good enough.
How about Shelton? You know General Shelton?
Never met him. He has a hell of a service reputation, though.
He's a terrific guy. Yeah. A North Carolinian.
He went to UNC, didn't he?
I think he went to State, North Carolina State.
Oh, okay.
And then went on to throw that sort of
and he's
superb education.
He's got a lot of good
allows you to
recipes for
have.
snake over an open fire.
Well, I don't know about that, but he is one of those people who seem to have performed magnificently in the field. Was not a desk jockey.
Oh, he's a very serious professional soldier and king of the snake eaters. So,
what does that mean, king of the snake eaters?
The snake eaters, the snake eater is a term they use for people in special operations.
Yeah, and that's things like the Green Berets or things like seals.
Seals, they all eat snakes. Yeah.
Yeah. They call them snake eaters.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've asked you this before. I mean, tell me who your heroes are.
Oh God, there's lots of them. We live in a society that's awash with heroes. Physicians, guys who battle with life and death issues every day. I do a lot of stuff with the faculty at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and I'm talking world-class intellects, and they battle with death on a daily basis. They're heroes. Cops, firemen. Firemen. What's a fireman do? He runs into a burning building to save people he doesn't even know. That's heroic. A cop answering a silent alarm. That's heroic. We live in a society where there's lots of people who do their work every day, and for the most part, we don't think about them except when we need them, and then we get their respect. We give them the respect they deserve. Maybe not as much as we ought to. Unfortunately, the media very often ignores them. Last week we had those two cops killed on Capitol Hill, and
the media didn't ignore that. For goodness sakes, I've never seen so much attention for a story.
They sort of made up for all the other cops they ignored, covering those guys, which is fine. But what about all the city cops in New York or Baltimore or Chicago or St. Louis?
On this point, I beg to differ because it is such a good story, I think, for newspapers. I mean, if you look at the Daily News and the New York, they put those stories on the front page all the time.
And
the heroism of those people, because it sells newspapers and it's a good story. So they're there all the time.
Well, in a city like New York, St. Louis, Phoenix, Arizona, different places. I'm not sure that they always get the respect they deserve.
Why don't you write about? I mean, if you're interested in medicine, if you're interested in say, these other areas, is it because, why not write beyond the military?
Well,
and beyond?
I did. In Executive Orders, there was a major medical subplot, which I put in there.
Can you imagine doing a story that does not have a military base? I mean, that's venturing off the reservation for you.
It's possible. Cardinal of the Kremlin had very little of that.
Yeah.
And so did Patriot Games didn't have very much. I mean, but you fit the pieces into the story.
Without Remorse is going to be made into a movie at some point?
I sure hope so. We haven't made a deal on it yet.
It's the one you like, isn't it?
It's one of the books I like a lot,
Why is that?
Oh, it's a book in which I got to be bad. I mean, the hero is a serial killer who tortures people. I broke every rule there was in the business then, and I got away with it. That's kind of fun. When
you think about this, I mean, what are look at this picture here. I mean, looks like General Clancy?
Oh, it's me pretending to be an aviator wearing a flight suit.
Gazing out into the wild blue yonder. It looks like, are you standing on a...
I'm standing on my own property overlooking the Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, I see. And who took
some
photographer
from a few years ago.
Can you imagine not writing novels? I mean, what you might do if you didn't write?
Well, I can't turn into a professional golfer because I'm not good enough.
Do you like golf, though?
I like golf, but I do X-rated golf.
Yeah. X-rated meaning what?
I mean, it's crummy.
Oh, I see. It's not something you want to see.
No,
it's not pretty.
One of the great terrors of my life is playing golf in public and having people, cover me and commentary. well, Mr. Clancy's elected not to play this ball, and we'll take another shot. You know, and I understand the way he flubbed up the first one. Yeah.
When you look at today's crisis in Washington, the investigation of the president, what do you think?
I think it's a bad thing for the country. I mean, it's doing damage to the office of the president. It's doing damage to America's image globally. It may have national security implications. It's not a good thing.
Well, let's stop there. What are the national security implications?
Well, if the American president is weak or is weakened by extraneous difficulties, then people who don't like America figure, well, maybe here's an opportunity for us to do something that he won't have time to deal with, or he'll be too distracted to deal with it effectively.
So, I mean, who are the villains for you in this thing?
Oh, terrorists, any foreign government that has interests contrary to our own.
How vulnerable, when you look at the national security interests of the country, where is our most vulnerable point? I assume it's terrorism of some kind.
Oh, terrorism, which is not so much a national security as a police problem. I mean, in the way the government operates now, the FBI is the principal counterterror agency, not the military. And the FBI has been quite effective at dealing with terrorism, probably more effective than any police agency in the world. But I mean,
and when they're successful, we rarely.
Exactly. And when it's successful, a guy quietly goes to prison, and when it's unsuccessful, somebody blows up a building in Oklahoma. It's awfully hard to prevent, the one madman, as the Timothy McVeigh was in Oklahoma, or the screwballs did the World Trade Center here in New York. But then, Jimmy Fox, who ran the New York field office, had those guys in custody in 3-4 days.
Which was what the break was there. I've forgotten what the break was.
Well, they went back to collect the deposit on the truck.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well,
which is
kind of mistake.
Which is illustrative of the fact that the average terrorist isn't smart. I mean, smart terrorists go to law school. It's that sort of situation. Terrorism is a potential problem, but we don't have a national security threat today in the same sense we had it 10 years ago. When 10 years ago there was this country called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics that had 10,000 warheads aimed at us, and that was a big deal. That could have destroyed America as a culture, as a country. That's not there anymore. And the threats we have today, while vicious, are relatively minor. And okay, they kill off 20 or 30 people. That's a bad thing. But is it important to the country as a whole? Not really, except in an aesthetic sense. In terms of physical security, that's a minor threat, not a major threat.
When you look at people like Iraq, the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Libyans, in some cases they're called rogue states. Give us a track, one or more. North Korea, perhaps. Don't you worry? Do you worry that that they are near developing atomic weapons, and that therefore the potential of somebody who sees the world differently than sane and reasonable people might use it?
That's a possibility. I mean, with India and Pakistan, that's a problem.
Rogue states, but they're
well, by our standards, they are. The press didn't report that at least 2 of the Pakistani detonations were duds. They were fizzles. They didn't go off.
Yeah. And I think something happened to the Iranian missile at the end, didn't it?
Yeah, it could be. The fact of the matter is that were those countries to target the United States, the consequences would be very severe for the countries launching the attack. I mean, if Iraq, for example, would set off a nuclear device in the United States, the next day Baghdad turns into a parking lot. Same thing would be true of India or Pakistan, and they know that. And people, Saddam Hussein, he's a dictator, and dictatorship is a business without a pension plan. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't retire from being a dictator, you die. And as any normal, rational person, he wants to be alive as long as possible. So he's not going to do something that's going to threaten his own life.
Well, he did something by invading Kuwait that threatened his own life. I mean, he's damn lucky that
he was luckier.
He
was luckier than you know, because we did make several determined attempts to get him, and unfortunately, they all miscarried.
What happened?
He was lucky.
I mean, what happened? Why did they miscarry?
Combination of luck and fundamental difficulty in getting a guy like that who's, people have been trying to kill Saddam Hussein for 40 years. Yeah. The reason he's alive is he knows quite a few interesting and actually fairly simple tricks for keeping himself alive.
Like he sleeps in different places. He
exactly.
has people that he knows.
Nobody knows where he's going to be on a day-to-day basis.
And he has doubles all over the place.
Yeah, and supposedly we got 1 or 2 of his doubles.
Oh, we killed thinking that it was him.
Yeah. Or as one of my friends once said, well, what if we got him and then the double went to and then the double went to his kids and said, well, it's like this, guys. If you admit your father's dead, then you're dead. On the other hand, if you say I'm your father, then you're alive. What are you going to do? And so what if there's a double running Iraq right now? Probably not, but it's kind of an amusing proposition. So, killing people like that is a lot more difficult. It's not like TV or the movies. And CIA does not have a great deal of expertise in killing people because the CIA does not do that.
Will they contract it out?
To whom?
Well, that's my question.
I mean,
that was my next
yellow
question.
pages to assassins
no.
are us? I mean,
look, this is not this is not an unheard of idea. Think about the effort to get Castro.
Yeah, and a good friend of mine was a government prosecutor, and he was tagged with pursuing with the stuff developed from the Church Committee hearings. And this friend of mine, before he was an attorney with the Justice Department, he was an agent with the FBI. And he told me once that he prostrated himself to God every night saying, please, God, don't let this go forward. I don't want the world to know how inept
these guys
the government was at trying. It couldn't find one guy. They couldn't find one shooter to take Castro down. Not one competent shooter. The whole government could not find the one guy.
Well, see, I find that amazing to me because of the following. I mean, you take what we now know. I mean, I came to know this in the last several years about people who are trained as snipers. Why aren't they that good as a shooter that they...
Well, there's more to
access
it than that.
is one thing, but being a shooter is not a problem, is it?
First of all, you have to identify the target. You have to know where the target's going to be on a day-to-day basis. Then you have to get your shooter close to that point. And he has to be set up and ready to take the shot at a precise point in time.
With an exit strategy.
Oh, yeah, and he probably wants to get out and get home to the wife and kids. First of all, the fundamental problem is gathering the information. I mean, it's putting troops on the ground, putting spooks on the ground, and finding out where, in this case, Castro is going to be. It's not that easy.
Someone once said to me, and I had no way to test this, that the Mossad could have gotten.
The Mossad is an organization that's been living on its own press clippings for quite a while.
Not as good as it's said to be.
Nobody's as good as they say Mossad was, and Mossad has screwed up many times. They screwed up
certainly recently.
They screwed up in 1973. I mean, when they gave the Israeli government like 4 hours warning that a war was going to start. They're supposed to do a little bit better than 4 hours. 1970, the Yom Kippur War in 1973 was very bad.
They blame the military for that too.
Well, naturally, they didn't take the blame themselves, but they were the principal intelligence gathering agency of the Israeli government, and they didn't gather the intelligence, did they? Look, these are human institutions, and they have human frailties. Now, if the Israelis could have taken out Saddam Hussein, yeah, maybe so, but they didn't, and they have reason to do so. The Iranians have reason to do so, and the Iranians are co-religionists. I mean, Iraq is a majority Shia country, and Iran is a Shia, ruled by the Shia branch of Islam. Right. And so there's a great, heck of a motivation for Iranians to arrange for the death of Saddam Hussein. They haven't been able to bring it off. Why?
I don't know. You tell me.
Because Saddam Hussein is very skilled at keeping himself alive, and he does it by taking relatively simple steps of not letting people know where he's going to be on a day-to-day basis.
So the best way to do it, probably, in the end, is you got to get to somebody who's part of the House Guard.
Exactly. That's how I did it in executive orders.
Right, and that's how Indira Gandhi was killed, by someone who was part of her
by our own protective detail, because they were all Sikhs, and she went out of her way to annoy the Sikhs, and they blew her away in her own garden.
Yeah, and so that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, but it's the best way is also the most difficult way. How do you get to somebody who's that close?
Look, I mean, okay, so I mean, you're talking about killing a dictator. You're not talking about killing somebody in a democracy.
Right.
Because if you look at all the random assassinations here, whether it's Kennedy or King, and I mean, these guys seem like crackpots that come out of nowhere.
No, that's a typical assassin. It's a screwball. Yeah. And it's always been that way.
But the reason that we don't do it is because we can't do it. Let's take Saddam.
Because we do not have...
Even though there's a national policy against it.
The reason we don't do it, first of all, it's an executive order promulgated by President Ford back in the 1970s, which is the rule, but any president can just say, draft me a new one, as Jack does in executive orders. You have to, once you decide you want to do it, you develop the political will to do it, then you have to have the training and the equipment and the right people to make something like that happen. These are not trivial exercises. These are difficult things to do.
Who's the best military strategist ever to work for ever to serve in the United States Armed Services? MacArthur?
I'd say MacArthur, yeah. Although if you go back to the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman was a superb operational commander. Or for that matter, Dave Palmer used to be commandant up at West Point. Wrote a book about George Washington as a strategist and said he was pretty good. I mean, but
there's a new book about Grant called, I think, Ulysses Grant Reconsidered.
Grant was, he won. Number one, he won, and that's what you pay generals to do, is win. He was in effect, he won the war, and that's what they paid him for, and so you have to put him up high up on the list.
When other generals were failing at the same task.
Oh yeah,
McClellan and the rest of them.
Well, McClellan, he wasn't a general; he was a sort of a drill instructor.
What was it Lincoln said to McClellan? General McClellan, if you don't plan to use that army, give it to me.
Lend it to me. Yeah, exactly. I'd say the consensus would be Douglas MacArthur, for a number of reasons. His accomplishments in the field were extraordinary, but more than that, here's a guy who was born on a cavalry post in the 1880s, and when the high tech was a lever action Winchester 73 rifle, and at the end of his tenure in the military, he had nuclear weapons and jet aircraft under his control. I mean, that's an enormous leap of technology and capabilities, and he assimilated all of it.
This is also a guy who, when he went to West Point, his mother went up there to live with him.
Well, things were different back then.
What do you mean they were different?
And he was first captain. He was first captain of the Corps. I mean, he was number one guy in his class, and he was on the crazy side of courageous.
Wasn't he both the number one academically and also number one in terms of captain of the Corps?
Yeah, he was. He did everything he could have done, could possibly have done. He had the courage of a lion. I mean, he was on the crazy side of brave. He was always exposing himself to danger because he was one of these guys that thought, they haven't made the bullet that's going to kill me. And there are a lot of people who think that way, but most of them get dead as lieutenants. Charles de Gaulle was like that, and a few other people. They just don't believe they can be harmed, and so they're always doing foolish things. So MacArthur was physically, immensely courageous.
Who had the largest ego, Patton or MacArthur?
You don't get to be a general without having a capacious ego, but to put the two of them in a room, you'd probably end up with a fist fight. I mean, no one time zone is big enough for those two guys. They were both superb commanders.
In terms of those who fought against the United States, Rommel, maybe?
Oh, God. Albert Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, was very effective. Rommel was a fine operational commander. Gerd von Rundstedt was pretty good as well. The Germans turned a lot of good operational commanders, but as an American general, William Dupay wrote back in the 1970s, "Why do we study the German army so much? They haven't won a war in 100 years." And I read that and I thought, well, yeah, actually, that's true. But
then who should we be studying?
Everybody. Napoleon, Frederick the Great, Wellington. You study everybody. The funny thing about...
Yeah, but Napoleon lost at Waterloo.
True, he won at a lot of other places.
He didn't win in Moscow.
I got awfully cold. No, you study everything. If you get into a historical discussion with any general in the Army, you all of a sudden you find yourself in the receiving end of a 2-hour lecture that goes all the way back to Alexander the Great and forward from there. And then he says, and that's why we deploy tanks the way we do, because of all this 2,000 years of accumulated military experience. And that's the way these generals study military history. Every general we have in the Army is a very serious professional historian.
When you go to lecture, either at some military training school, some officers training or FBI academy.
Last year I spoke at the Air War College in Alabama.
Okay, the War College. So what do you talk about? I mean, what's Clancy there for?
Oh, a historical overview, and then a look into the future, and I propose changes in the future. At Maxwell Air Force Base, at the Air War College, I proposed assassination as an instrument of policy, as I executed in executive orders, where I say the logical extension of stealth aircraft and precision-guided munitions is targeting the enemy chief of state from the first day of the war, because it's the only thing that's really morally defensible. We had to kill 6 million Germans to get 2 Adolf Hitler.
Right.
If we'd been able to take Hitler out on the first day, we would have saved a hell of a lot of lives.
Sure,
Not just Germans, but Americans and Jews and Poles and Russians as well.
And you could also argue that if, in fact, there was, if, in fact, one of the American bombs in the Vietnam War had taken out Ho Chi Minh, nobody would have shed one single tear. Right?
Yeah, particularly, well, Vonoy and Jap, I think, would be the guy you really wanted to kill.
Well, Jap would be better. That's right, the military
get them both in
commander.
the same
but
room,
just
fine.
take military commander, Jap. Okay. Yet at the same time, if we send in someone, well, that's war, so that's different, I guess. You could argue different. But, we would have had no tears shed if some missile had taken out Saddam Hussein, would we?
I don't think anybody would have cried very much about it.
Whereas it would have been against national policy to send a shooter in there to try to take him out, wouldn't it?
Well, no, the way I propose to do it is you put somebody in on the ground with a laser designator, and because you don't have to get very close to use one of those, and then when you know where the guy is, just put a laser spot on his bedroom window, and an F-117 flies overhead and drops 2 GBU-25s through the window.
And it can find the laser spot.
Oh yeah, that works. That technology does work. I've put it in several of my. I put it in my first book like 9 years ago. So the technology's there. Just a matter of putting, knowing where the guy is and putting a laser spot on that location, and the bomb will find the spot.
Did they try that?
No.
Did you recommend it by then? When was, I've forgotten when executive order was.
More in executive orders, it was more recent than that. Can it be done? Yeah. Do we do it? No. Why? First of all, is the executive order promulgated by President Ford, and secondly, because we haven't thought about it. And before once you decide to do something, you have to train people to do it and give them the equipment and the support they need to accomplish the mission.
When you look at, where does it all come from for you, which is an inevitable question from you? Is it reading? Is it conversation?
All of the above.
The interviews?
Yeah. I talk with people, we kick ideas around, and I do a little thinking and analysis on my own.
So there, in a sense, you were constantly in search of.
I got a friend, he just retired from the FBI. His last job was down in Dallas, and I called down there to talk to him once, and I got his secretary. He was on the phone. I was talking to his secretary. She goes, "You know what the boss says about you?" He says, "He's a sponge. He's going to remember everything you say. He's a sponge." Well, I'm a sponge, and I absorb. I'm always at work, and I'm always absorbing information. And that's who I am.
But you're also fascinated by motivation and what makes people tick, and that kind of sense of how they make decisions.
And for the most part, the people I write about, they're motivated by the same thing: they love of country. They're people who prefer order to chaos and try to bring order out of chaos. People who try to do the right thing.
And people who want to win.
Yep.
Great to see you again.
Good to be back, pal.
Tom Clancy, Rainbow Six. John Clark stars, leading a fight against eco-terrorism. Back in a moment. Stay with us.